All right then. So this morning, we're going to be looking at the 5 steps to the perfect process. So this is it's a methodology to get you started in mapping process and getting going from an undocumented process all the way through to a documented, embellished process. So I'll start by giving a brief overview. Just can hear an echo, so I'm just going to, if everyone could just go on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to give a brief overview about the steps, and then we'll look at putting the methodology into practice. So, as mentioned, it's 5 steps. We've got step 1. So step 1 is the title and scope. So it's always good to do this at the start of the session. So this is very much from the perspective of mapping a process in a workshop. So where you've got participants, you've got attendees, but the same principles apply if you're mapping in isolation on your own. So it's always good to do it at the start of sessions. So this is the title and the scope. So it should generally be the first thing we do. It really helps to focus everybody on the task at hand. So again, especially if you're mapping in a workshop, it ensures everybody's on the same page regarding what we're hoping to map in the session. The scope might change in the session as the session progresses, and that's fine. But you can always bring the focus back to what was agreed at the start of the session. If everybody starts, if things start to veer outside of the scope, it's always good to have that start and end point that allows you to say, hang on a minute, this is what we're talking about today, and perhaps we can talk about the other stuff another time. So step 2 is activities. So once we've agreed the title, the scope, we've got our start and the end point, we start to look at what work happens in this process. So activities are where we're capturing the work that's done in the process. In Skore, activities are captured in what boxes. So the idea is that we start to throw up a number of what boxes, perhaps sort of 5, 6 process what boxes onto the canvas, and we can start to get people to think about their ways of working. So if a lot of you are familiar to Skore, you'll know that when we throw a what box onto the screen, it will start to ask us questions like what happens and who does it. So the reason we start with activities, I think, is because everyone's always happy to talk about the work they do. It gets a good flow to the session going. And when we're describing the activity, we always describe it as a verb noun because we're doing something to something. So those are our activities. That leads us on to step 3, which is our outputs. So for every activity, there's an outcome. So outputs are used to describe the tangible outcome to an activity or the deliverable or the reason why you're doing that activity. So this is where things might slow down slightly because we're starting to challenge people as to why they do the work they do. So, you ask questions like, now you've told me what you do, how do you know when it's finished? And what's the outcome? Are you handing over anything? Is there a document that's completed that comes out the back of this that's being used in the next activity along? And it's often where improvement opportunities start to come out. So, and we can move on to those in step 5 and how we capture those. So step 4 is the flow and who does it. So it's as simple as putting your process in order. We iterate back through the process. So you'll often find walking back through the process is where people start to pick up on missing steps. So when you talk back the process to people, it gives a different perspective on it sometimes, and they say, actually, there's an activity, a major activity we've missed here that sits in between these 2 boxes. And then that leaves us with the who does it. So again, pretty simple. Again with Skore, as well as asking you what happens on an activity, it asks you who does it. So this is where we capture the role, and we tend to use roles rather than names of people. And then step 5, the final step. So this depends very much on the context of the process as to what else you do. But here you're capturing, supporting information, generally using things like note boxes, attachment panel to capture that supporting information. Might be queries, it might be questions, it might be improvement opportunities. So if you're documenting an as-is process, perhaps you might want to capture some improvement opportunities, or if you're capturing a systems process, it might be that you want to start to capture the systems that are used at each activity that the roles are interfacing with. And it's also a good opportunity to embellish and tidy up the process as well. So that's your 5 steps. I think what we'll do is we're going to go put it into practice, and we'll start to look at how we execute this methodology in Skore. So I'm just going to go to edit mode. Okay, so I've predefined what the scope, what the title is of this process, and we're going to go through the employee expenses process because it's one that I think most people are familiar with. And what we'll do is I'm going to use shortcuts where I can in this process. So I've got rid of the editing panel for now. So I'm going to use a Y and a click on my keyboard to bring out a Y box, and it's here I want to, what's the start point of my process. So I'm doing the scope here. So it could be that an expense is incurred, okay, and it might be, expense incurred by the employee if we're being prescriptive. So that's our start point, and then our end point, where we want to get to, is the expenses paid into the employee bank account. I'm going to apologise once on my spelling. Okay, so we've got a title, we've got an agreed scope of our start point and our end point, and then step 2 is to start to document what our activities are. So again, a keyboard shortcut is a W and click, and that will bring out a what box. So I'm going to bring out 6 what boxes onto the screen. We like to keep it to 6 because it keeps things simple. And of course, we can capture the lower level of detail in a detailed view if we need to, or remove what boxes as we go along. So what happens? It's here that you start to ask participants, what work do you do in the process? And you'll find some people start high level, some people like to start low level. The way I work is just to capture as much as I can, and if I see that activities are perhaps going together, we can start to group activities together, and then we can submerge those into a what box later on. So here I just like to capture as much information as I can. So I'm gonna be the other participants in this scenario. So at some point somebody's got to have to pay the expense. So I'm going to say somebody's going to have to pay the expenses. At some point somebody's got to create a new expenses record. Okay, and then at some point somebody's got to scan the receipt. Okay, at some point we're going to upload them somewhere. Somebody may have to approve the expense. Okay, so we've got, and then another one might be, we might need to do a check. So check for submissions. Okay. At this point, I could order them. And again, the 5 steps aren't, don't have to be linear. You can move them about a little bit. So I've captured these out of order, so I'm just going to move them into order so it makes a little bit more sense. So the first thing we might need to do is to create a new expenses record. So I'm just going to move that up here. The next thing we might do is scan the receipts. Then we might upload. Then somebody needs to approve it. Once we've approved it, somebody might need to do a check on those expenses, and then we pay them. So we've got a bit of ordering going on there. And now we move to the next stage. I think it's step 3, and that's outcomes. So as I hover over these activity boxes, you'll notice that you'll see these grey connector points. And as I hover over them, they'll turn green. So it's here, I can hover over a connector point, I select, left click on my mouse, drag out slightly and click away, and that will render me a Y box. Again, there's a few ways of doing that. I can select the activity, I can hit space, and it will give me a Y box, or I can use my keyboard shortcut Y and a click to give me an outcome there as well. So I'm just going to create outcomes for all of these. I appreciate that some of these will actually have an outcome of expenses paid. So we can probably make that inference there and say that once the expense is paid, it gets paid into the employee's bank account. But for the others, we don't have outcomes. So in our outcomes, we're not capturing activity, so it's not verb noun. We're trying to capture, the outcome. So create new expenses record. It might be that expenses record is in the system. Okay, if we're scanning the receipts, it might be that the receipt is in a digital format. And if we're uploading the receipts, they're going somewhere. So receipts are recorded against maybe an expenses record somewhere. Okay, and then if we're approving the expense, it's at this point where you're going to capture maybe more than one outcome or exception. So if it's an approval activity, there's generally going to be an approval or a rejection. So it might be that the expense is approved, and then I could just drag and drop out a what box to capture an exception. So we're going to go expenses rejected. Okay, we can look at what we're going to do with expenses rejected at the next stage when we start to look at the flow, and then checking for submissions. So it might be that submitted expense meets guidelines. Okay, so if I'm reading it correctly, we've got outcomes for each. So it's at this point we start to join it up, and again, principle is the same. Every box has a connector point, and I can just drag and drop into here. We've got the flow because we sorted the flow out previously, and we can start to connect in our boxes. Now here, we could go from here and drag it all the way around, but I think I like to have it coming out of here for sort of page real estate reasons, and just like the general look and flow of it a bit better. So I'm going to connect that into the top there. Everybody will have their own different way of connecting boxes and mapping. And there we go. So I have an exception here of expense rejected. What do we do with that? Is up for discussion. It might be that we go and create a new expenses record. So I'm just going to put that coming out the bottom there, and I'm using these blue connector points to move my connecting lines, and I'm just going to drag that and we'll put it up into there for the moment. Okay, there might be a better way of making that flow. Okay, so now we've done that, we can start to look at who does it. So in here, when I click in, it's starting to ask me who does it, and it's here I can capture the roles. So I'm going to capture employee. Okay, if we're using a responsibilities matrix, we can select that there, but that's generally perhaps a separate discussion. Maybe in the what else step of our step 5. When I click away, employee will be registered on the box there. Scanning the receipts, that's probably also the employee, and now I've registered that role, it's going to come up in my role list, so I can select employee there. And again, uploading the receipts, again, it's probably also the employee. But when we get down to approving the expense, it's going to be some sort of manager, so we'll call it a line manager. And then once the line manager's approved the expense, maybe the finance admin needs to check the submission as well. And then paying the expense, we'll call it the finance manager. Okay, so now we've got the flow, we've got the activities, we've got the outputs, we've got the flow, we've got who does it. We can start to look at the what else. So again, it very much depends on what you're capturing in your process. But if we're talking about somebody's got a query or a question, generally I'll capture those in note boxes and then maybe translate them to a custom field or maybe some supporting information in my attachment panel. But I like to capture these in note boxes. So again, I've used a keyboard shortcut there. That's N in a click to give me a note box. And it's here I can capture, questions, comments, improvement opportunities, and then I can just connect those up like so. If we pick up on improvement opportunities, this is where I might start to use things like custom fields. So if I hover over check for submissions, I've got the two icons. I've got the create detailed view icon, so that allows me to go into the lower level of detail, but I've also got the attachment panel icon. So if I click onto that, it will open me the attachment panel on the right hand side. If I click attachments, it gives me the option to add all sorts of attachments. So I can add text. Skore supports Markdown. That is changing in Skore Spinnaker, although it will still support in Skore Spinnaker. We'll just have an editing text editor as a bit of an improvement. But for now, we use Markdown. So I'm using 3 hashes for a title. So you might have a title and then a relative list, an indent, for example. And here's where I can capture maybe checklist items if I'm not capturing a sub level of detail there. But if we go back to improvement opportunities, how would I capture an improvement opportunity? It might be in a custom field. So I might create a name for myself for my custom field, improvement opportunity. And then the grouping. So this is where, it's the type of improvement opportunity. So it might be, let's say it's an automation. There's going to be a finance admin bot that's able to check for submissions, and then we can make a comment here as to the type of what our improvement opportunity is exactly, and I can save that there, and that's tagged information against the activity. Okay, I appreciate I've been talking for quite a while. The last thing I'll do is tidying up my process and embellishing it. So we've got the opportunity to add icons to our process if we wanted to. Really quickly, I'll just show you some of the keyboard shortcuts to tidying up your process. So if we imagine we've captured this process on the fly, it's a little bit messy perhaps, and I want to tidy it up. I can choose my anchor point. So in this case, it might be my input. And then I can hit Shift and Control, and then a left select on my mouse. So that's Shift Control, left select on my mouse, and that will give me this selector box where I can go and select all other objects that I want to align, and I can hit T for top, and that will top everything to my anchor point, which was that input, and then I can do H, and that will align everything horizontally. So you can see that's all. It's messed up my icon, messed up my arrow here, so I can just redo that. Leave that there for a moment while we do the rest, and then I might want to line everything up. I want to line everything up vertically, in which case I can select everything and do C, and that will align everything centrally. So just to do that one again is T, and then I might want to do H for horizontal, and then if I wanted to, I can go and line those up as well. So that concludes the session on 5 steps to the perfect process. So I'll open it up now to any questions if there's anything you'd like to revisit. Or if there's any questions on something unrelated, but perhaps Skore related, I'll welcome those questions now.
Sam, one thing which I really found these 5 steps, because I say it's the simple 5 steps, but I think the power of them like exponentially increases when you're sitting in a room full of people. I think that's really the message that I'd share, is that it's great for your own mindset and challenging your own thinking, but when you've got different people, different mindsets in a room, it's a really good handrail for getting them to agree to a process. Otherwise you end up going off on tangents and focusing on one activity, or focusing on the roles too soon. That's my sort of feedback on using the 5 steps.
I think it's the questions that the boxes ask as well. So these objects, you'll find that once you've done this a couple of times, all you have to do is throw an activity box up, and people will start shouting out their activities. And when you hit that space bar and it says so, that they'll start to give you that information before you even need to ask it. Very valuable in a workshop session. Any other questions from the floor?
Is everyone using the 5 steps in their workshops?
I will do now.
One thing I forgot to mention actually is we do have, and I'll circulate this on the community after the call. Everything I've talked through today we have in a sort of a 1-pager, or it's a 2-pager. So it just gives you those high level steps, the title and scope and activities, and some of the things you ought to be thinking about. More than happy to share this, as I'm more than happy to share the process if people want to have a link to the process as well.